All right, Chelsea fans, welcome back to another episode of the London is Blue podcast. We're going to be doing a little bit of, let's say, distractions during the international break as we continue to fill your feed, even though there are no matches. And in case you've forgotten, this is going to be a recurring one. We've got Phil from Chelsea Youth on. And again, like I said, he's going to be here monthly, talk about what's going on over at Cobham and the dev squad and the youth teams. So don't forget, this is going to be one of many. So Phil, we are excited to have you back on, and this is a perfect gap filling piece of content. This could not be better timed. Well done, sir.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. I really enjoyed coming on last season. I'm really looking forward to discussing everything to do with the academy throughout this season.
It's gonna be good. Dan, I'll let you go through the running order of the show here real quick before we get into some of the more specific stuff here.
Yeah, we've got a couple of things we want to get through. Obviously, it's been a while since academy football has gotten underway in England. There was a much longer break from the end of that season to the beginning of this season. So kind of getting an update more so in general about what's going on within the state of the academy, given COVID-19 restrictions and how things maybe have changed a little bit. Going through our U23, our dev squad, who mathematically won their way to a trophy last season, which was very exciting. And then we also talk about the U18s, what's going on with them, host of new players to that side, and then any loans that we might be watching over keenly. But, I think that's probably the way we would just want to jump in, Phil, is kind of thinking about, Chelsea specifically, but maybe academy football as a whole, has obviously changed a whole lot within the UK. Like, what's your read on it? How are you seeing maybe the landscape changing before we kind of jump into maybe what's going on with the specific teams?
It's really interesting because we see sort of the top level of it. We see the under 23, under 18 football, but academy football stretches down to under 9s, under 8s, and not just at the elite level. We're talking across the entire country, down to grassroots level, just kids playing on a Sunday morning or whatever. So the main academy teams had 6 months off between competitive matches. They finished at the start of March and didn't come back until the 12th of September when the Premier League started. They had about a month of pre-season, but for a lot of teams, that was a pre-season of flux. There were some teams that can't use their own training facilities because it's shared with the first team and it's in too close of a proximity. And the same applies to their matches. They've had to play matches at different venues than they ordinarily would. So everyone's sort of learning as they go, and there's been the odd match that's already fallen victim to positive tests or just a safety first procedure, not necessarily at Chelsea, but Liverpool were meant to play Man United on the opening day of the under-18 season. That match was postponed because of a positive test, and it's just like anything else, we're going to be sort of feeling it out as we go throughout the season. The younger age groups, so the 15-year-olds down to the under 7s and under 8s, they came back 3.5 weeks later. So they've just gotten underway sort of at the end of September, start of October. They too had a lot of time off, and I mean, everyone's doing the best they can, but it's really hard to know sort of the long-term effects of having such an absence of not just competitive football, but access time with the coaching staff and with your teammates, and being in a collaborative and collective environment. We're only really at the start of this.
And Phil, I guess a quick follow-up on this would be, we know that Chelsea obviously had some pretty strict restrictions around Cobham and due to the COVID-19 outbreak that happened back in March. Did that affect the youth teams in any more dramatic way than it affected the first team, or is this, are all the safety procedures and protocols just being followed no matter what age group is out there, or how the age groups are collectively in the same building together? Like, how does that all work?
So until the Premier League season finished last season, it was first team only. Chelsea have got the benefit of their site being effectively split in half by a long road that goes down the middle, as you guys know. The right side, as you drive in, is for the first team. The left side is for the academy. And it's such a vast premises that you can use some of the pitches further away from the entrance and distance effectively. But because the Premier League season finishing was the be-all and end-all, there was a bubble, and there were strict protocols across all 20 Premier League clubs for that not to break. And so when that season finished, academy boys were starting to come back in sort of you start with the 23s and 18s, and then you drip down to the younger age groups, and slowly but surely they've started to open it up a little more. So the first game of the season was strictly behind closed doors. The first home game was then your players were allowed one family member per player to watch, and risk assessments are being done all the time. And it's just a case of taking it one match at a time and trying to just open up a little bit more while still maintaining the strict protocols that have been put in place by the club.
It's a balancing act that just as like I think the youth league is really starting to click, things are going, we're starting to get more on TV, some more publicity. Then obviously the pandemic hit, same thing with women's football, and things have definitely taken steps backwards. A lot of things have in life, and the hard thing is for these guys, they're in American terms, in high school, looking to get recruited for that first pro contract, and like many Division I athletes, 2 and 3 right now in America, they don't really know what this season's gonna be like. Do I play? Do I not play? Do I get a free year? Like, how is this gonna work? And so a lot of the same concerns and issues exist with this group. It's just, different terminology, essentially. Same situation. So let's go ahead and break into each team a little bit here. So if we start with the dev squad, which would be the older group of kids, this would be like our U23 team. Look, it was a great season. And Dan's even put in a fancy word he wants me to read in this script, says, even truncated for Andy Meyer's side. And for all of you that know me so well, that's right in my back pocket in my vocabulary. Love a good truncated. He put in here from Phil's article, the development squad were crowned Premier League 2 champions on points per game as they held a 3-point lead over Leicester City with 4 matches remaining, part of a league run in which they were unbeaten from start to parentheses premature finish. Again, you can find said articles. Where are we going? What website is it, Phil, that we can find the rest of your articles?
You can read them on thechelsea.net.
Obviously, if you're not following on Twitter, you're silly. So, what do you remember most fondly about the season that just passed, Phil, and kind of how that tees us up for hopefully a season this year?
I think the way they maintained the unbeaten season was what I remember most fondly about it, because there were so many times where it looked to be in peril, and early in the season they came back from 2-0 down to rescue a draw 3 times in the space of 5 or 6 games from my memory. And it was an individual playing job, but it was coaching as well. There were so many matches where Andy Myers and John Harley and Eric Ramsey would figure out, okay, this is how the match is going this week, this is what I need to do. And it's testament to the players that they were able to shuffle around formations or positions to figure out how to get the result from each match. And it wasn't necessarily a season of fireworks or any spectacular performances, but it was a relentless professional job that they saw through. And it's disappointing that they didn't get to parade the trophy and celebrate in front of a crowd. They had to do that at Cobham behind closed doors with cameras, but it's the first league title they won at this level in 6 years, and they did a really, really good job of it.
How do you feel, just to maybe kind of talk about Myers for a moment? Obviously, this was his first season with the dev side, kind of going up through the Chelsea ranks of, coaching. How well do you think he handled the U23 setup, and obviously wins the championship unbeaten run? But was there anything that you took away as being really impressed by with his, kind of coaching ability or progression?
You could see it throughout the team from a match-to-match basis that they were really well drilled and know what they're meant to be doing. There's usually some sort of freedom for the players to express themselves and to take decisions into their own hands, and that's absolutely fine. But the way they set up and the way they played was familiar and consistent from week to week, and you don't always see that in academy football. And as much as anything else over the years, we know that Chelsea have produced some fantastic individual players, but the quality of coaching has underpinned it at every turn. And Myers now is a much better under-23 coach than he was a year ago, and that's the way it's meant to work, because it's not just development for the players, it's development for the coaching staff as well. They went out and they got Eric Ramsey from Shrewsbury Town to help support the backroom team. He's got a UEFA Pro license. It's another quality coach to work with an ever younger group. Remember, Myers isn't working with 20, 21, 22-year-olds in an under-23 league. He's working with 17 and 18-year-olds. So to turn those guys into title challengers speaks to the quality of his work.
Right. And you think about this, right, Phil, because Chelsea obviously are in the most enviable position of having too much youth talent for just a U17 type of squad. So, like, maybe talk a little bit about the composition of this squad, if you can, compared to maybe some of the other U23 squads that are out there, right? Because this is a typically younger squad than you would have elsewhere, right?
Yeah, everyone approaches it slightly differently, and the league is getting younger, but it is by definition an under-23 league, so it's not uncommon to see 20 and 21-year-olds playing regularly, especially for clubs that don't have the depth that Chelsea do. The only other team that's as young as Chelsea is Manchester City, and for obvious reasons. They have as much depth and as they cast their net as wide as Chelsea do in recruitment. So both teams end up with a bunch of young teenagers in their team, but City have often struggled. They finished just outside of the PL2 relegation zone last season. They've never really pushed for the title while going with this young approach, whereas Chelsea have often been in at least the top half of the league under Joe Edwards before Andy Myers. But so yeah, it's hard because you've got 2 or 3 years age difference, but it doesn't always tell. Because some of those 20 and 21-year-olds they be mentally checked out if they're playing those matches. They think, okay, what am I doing here? I should be out playing senior football somewhere else. Maybe by going younger, you keep the appetite of progression, because you know that after a season, maybe 18 months in the development squad, you're on to the next level of your career, which is at Chelsea, it's a loan move. Having that sort of career progression for these guys it helps keep the team more competitive than a team that might have 3 or 4 guys who don't know where they're going.
So when I'm looking at this roster, it's a bit smaller it's definitely smaller than the U18s. So I'm going to ask, when I get through this roster, Phil, kind of like, is that on purpose? Because first teamers coming down, U18ers going up. But you've got Carlos Ziger in goal, Pierre Ekwa Elimbi, Ian Matson, Xavier, or how do you say Xavier's? Mbuyamba? Did I do that right?
Mbuyamba.
Looks very Dutch. Sam McClellan, Daniel Simiu, Dujon Sterling, Jack Wakely in the defense. Midfielders, Tino Andrin, should be a very familiar name for you out there. Tierno Bayo, Henry Lawrence, and Marcel Lewis. And then forwards, just George Nunn and Charlie Brown listed on the Chelsea development squad website. But again, it's especially when you get in the U18s, it's still like a third of the players that team has. Is that on purpose?
There's a few guys that have stepped up to the development squad this season that aren't on the official squad. So Levi Colwell's played at centre half all season. Miles Pat Harris has come into the midfield. Lewis Bates in the midfield. And there'll be 1 or 2 others who've stepped up a little bit early. Lucas Bergstrom's been playing in goal. Brian Fiabema scored his first goal against Arsenal last weekend. So that's part of it, because the development squad is subject to losing players on loan at any moment. So they've already had George McEachran go on loan. John Russell's gone out on loan. Tarek Uwakwe's gone on loan. And the under-18s brought 14 new players in this summer. So you can't have those 14 plus the dozen that came last season into a 26-man squad for the under-18s. You just push the best ones up early. That's what Lewis Bate came up early last season. Colwell did it last year. So Livramento turned into a development squad regular last season. If they've proven themselves at under-18 level within a year, and some of these guys were playing as schoolboys, so they've had 18 months to 2 years of exposure at youth team, you push them on to the next target. They might be 5 or 10% short of being ready to play at that level, but by going up early, they often make that up in half the time.
So if you're looking at the list of who's in this U23 side to start the season, who do you think is going to be the focal point or the individual that, Myers is going to look to really kind of be the engine for this team, or be the face of what Chelsea U23 football looks like this season?
Based on the season so far, you'd be hard pressed to argue against Miles Harris, because we might have only had 4 or 5 games, but he's scored goals, he's created goals, he's been given the responsibility of playing number 10 early in the season, and played back as a deeper number 8 against Arsenal, and did both matches with real aplomb. And he's another of that sort of Tino Anjorin, Ruben Loftus-Cheek, strong physique, very elegant runner, very comfortable in possession, likes to impact the game in the final third. They all have their own specific attributes that differ from one another, but just as a very basic comparison, they're all of the same ilk. He turned 18 in September. You can look further back, and the 2 centre halves, Daniel Simiu and Levi Colwill, look like they've got a fantastic partnership going already. Colwill in particular is a lovely defender to watch. Left-sided, tall, broad, likes to step out and play the first pass, does the defending very well. Reminiscent a little bit of Jake Clark-Salter. And those two maybe sort of define what this team is right now. They're players who should still be eligible for the youth team, but have stepped up, played for the 23s, and played to a very high level already.
I know that Tino Anjorin is going to be a point of focus for Chelsea supporters this year. With Ruben and Ross leaving on loan, the grumbles around football Twitter have been that he might see some more time, just given the time with the first team, I should say, given the amount of fixtures that the first team have in such a short amount of time this season. Do you get the sense that he'll be a bit of a yo-yo player between both teams this year, or is he going to be primarily focused on the U23s?
I think he'll be a yo-yo player at least for the next 3.5 months or so. Obviously, he's not played any football since making his first team debut in March. He didn't play during the restart. He picked up an injury, hasn't played any pre-season, hasn't played for anyone so far this season. He is now back in training. He's going through his own pre-season, start getting first matches perhaps soon as he can for the development squad. The EFL domestic loan window closes the second half of next week, and it doesn't necessarily look like he'll go on loan yet, just because I think he wants to stay. He wants to see if there's an opportunity for him to get minutes in this congested schedule. Let's see how it goes between now and January, see what opportunities open up for him. If it looks like he needs more regular football at that point, the transfer window's open again, and it's not just the EFL at that point. You can go to wherever, because he's obviously a player of really high caliber, and you might argue that he can play at a higher level than the Championship already. I certainly would. But when you've had so much time out injured, you want to take it a little bit slower in the comeback phase. So we know he's plenty good for the PL2. He's already proven that, but there's no harm in getting him back up to speed at that level.
It's an interesting situation, and we talked about this in one of our other podcasts recently, with you can kind of take a gamble on a loan this fall because it's only for a couple months versus 3-4 months before. Or you can say, you know what, no, I am going to wait because the January transfer window is very close. I'm going to stay at Chelsea, see how things shake out, and then make a decision. And then, to your point, especially with this group, Phil, the EFL window is open even longer. So they've got more time to see how rosters and things shuffle out. So finally, for once, I think these guys are benefited by it. You know what's an interesting name that has popped up recently, and you had actually tweeted it as well. Charlie Musonda. Is that a name that we might see in the dev squad this season?
Again, potentially. He's missed the best part of 2 years of football. I think he's played 4 games as a sub for Vitesse, totaling fewer than 60 minutes in that time, when he's had serious cruciate ligament injuries. He's now been back in rehab for some time. I think he's approaching the point where he can get back on the field. I don't think there's any point in rushing alone at this stage. Chelsea would probably rather keep him in-house and keep a closer look on his fitness to make sure that he's ready for the next step. And yeah, the development squad will provide an opportunity for him to make a comeback in a in a safer place than just going straight back to Vitesse and seeing what it's like for a third year there. I'd certainly favour that. He's been training out in Dubai for the last few weeks. The pictures have gone around on social media. Everyone's seen that he's doing his best to bulk up, and some of that will be targeted, but some of it will just have come sort of naturally through age. He's 23 now, I think, and none of his family have ever been that big. Neither of his brothers were big. His dad was an international footballer, but again, his dad and his older brother Tika both had to retire early due to serious knee injuries. So he knows better than anyone that there's no point in rushing this right now. I mean, as a teenager, he's such a fun player to watch. So I can understand that there's a clamour for people to see him come back, because everyone loves to see players of that style and that carefree attitude. When he scored his first for the club against Nottingham Forest, I don't think I've ever seen a player happier to score a goal. So yeah, again, maybe we'll see him play for the development squad once or twice and then get his career back on track in January for sure.
But this is the team, at least, right? This is the purpose of this team, kind of within the higher structure, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
It's there for players to push through and continue development. But again, if the club owns an asset and owns a player that needs to take it a little bit slower and do their fitness work, then they'll come back and do so. Loftus-Cheek did it earlier in the year. He played a couple of development squad matches, and Lampard lamented that season was curtailed because he was just about to get more minutes under his belt and would have been more of a factor during lockdown. But again, there were 3 months out that he didn't expect to have to endure.
Then one follow-up question on, because I mean, you're looking at this list and these are all players that I think most Chelsea supporters will have a keen eye on, but the one I'll pick out of the defensive grouping would be Xavier Mbayamba. I mean, I know that he's obviously a new player to Chelsea. He got everyone really excited because he was our first signing this summer and everyone was clamoring for more. But I mean, the size and profile of this guy is pretty outstanding. So I just want to get your thoughts and feelings on what his pathway is this year and what he needs to work on. Obviously, he's kind of on the younger side of this group.
Yeah, the first thing to say is that he's recovering from knee surgery. It was a meniscus cleanup, and he's on course to be back before the end of this year. Mm-hmm. He looks every inch the modern defender just to look at him play. He's tall, he's strong, he's athletic, he's very comfortable in possession. He's played for Barcelona's academy. He ticks all of the boxes that people want, but everyone, for understandable reasons, given the state of Chelsea centre-half defending last year, got a little bit ahead of themselves when he signed. It doesn't help that he's been labelled the new Virgil van Dijk or whatever. He's barely played any senior football. He had a season in the Dutch second division, which is a division that Chelsea have loaned some players to, but given that they'll prefer to loan to the Eredivisie, you can see the comparisons of the difference in quality. And he played for Barcelona's under-19s. He didn't even get to play for Barcelona B. So he's arguably behind in his development compared to some of his now development squad teammates. But you should basically just view him as a lump of clay to mold, because if you're patient with him and you develop him right, then you've got a real defender on your hands in a few years' time. But that's the important thing, is a few years' time. He's not going to be making that sort of impression in the next year to 2 years. Someone like Mark Gurhey is a long way ahead of him for comparison.
So as we kind of take a look at just how the results have landed for us in the leasing.com trophy, Chelsea started the season with a 2-1 loss to Oxford United. Heading into the Premier League, we beat West Ham 1-0. We thoroughly enjoyed beating Southampton 4-1. We lost, unfortunately, to Brighton 2-0. We, in the leasing.com trophy, we had a 1-1 draw that went to pens against Walsall. And then our last result was a thumping of Arsenal 3-0. So that puts Chelsea right now second in the Southern Division, just behind Tottenham at 9 points to their 10. Just, any of these results, maybe in specific, Phil, that you would want to highlight or point to? I guess I maybe look at the first one and say, hey, you know what? Maybe that's just the fact that they were off for 6 months and probably has made some of it challenging to get back up to speed. But what's your read on the first couple results and what you're seeing from that first loss to Oxford to now beating Arsenal 3-0?
The Brighton PL2 defeat was their first league defeat in a year and a half. They obviously were unbeaten all of last year, and it was April 2019 that they last lost, and it was away to Brighton on the same pitch. So
Oh, no.
these things have a way of coming back to full circle, and there was no disgrace in losing to that Brighton team that night. Chelsea didn't play all of that bad. They gave up an early goal. Carlos Ziga came out, tried to clear from his bottom right-hand corner, gave it straight to a Romanian international centre-half who scored from the halfway line. That defender, Tudor Baluta, just went on loan to Dinamo Kiev. So it's not so often that you'll come up against a player of his experience and quality at under 23 level in England. But as far as the EFL trophy goes, Chelsea had lost in that last season. Oxford were in the League One playoff final last year. This wasn't their strongest 11 by any means, but it was still a very capable team. Chelsea played well. They gave up another goal with a defensive mistake, and on another night could have forced it to a draw, which in this competition goes to penalties for an extra bonus point, which they got against Walsall in the second group game. That Walsall performance was really impressive because there were times where they were up against it, against another really good League One team. They came on stronger in the second half. They got their equaliser, and then they showed their composure in the penalty shootout to go and win. They scored all 5 of their penalties. None of them looked like they lacked confidence. They all took up their spot kick with conviction, and they're finding themselves again. That they went out and beat Arsenal 3-0 a few days later, and they really should have had 9 or 10. They absolutely dominated Arsenal from start to finish.
The classic 9-0 against Arsenal, huh, Phil? I mean, you look at that, and that's probably the one that stands out for most Chelsea fans. But is the leasing.com trophy, like, assuming that the Chelsea are able to kind of get out of that group, is that a really important trophy for this team because they can play against more experienced first team sides from lower divisions?
Yeah, for sure. It's not just the experience of playing against senior pros. It's the experience of playing sort of competition tournament football. And it gets you into a different environment, a different mindset. And the next match is in November against Bristol Rovers. And they lost to Bristol Rovers last year, but they'll need to go there and win if they're to qualify. And their first season in this competition a few years back, they got to the semi-finals and lost to Lincoln on penalties. And that was a really uncompromising Lincoln team. It was Danny Cowley's team at the sort of their pomp. And they went there, they went up to Sinsel that night, and it was back when crowds were allowed in football stadiums. So it was a raucous atmosphere. A bunch of teenagers, Ampadu played, Hudson-Odoi played. They were under pressure for the entire night, and it didn't go their way. And they'd like to go as far as they can in the competition, but they understand that it's going to provide tougher fixtures than their league campaign will. That's a double-edged sword. You want to be in it for as long as you can, but you know that through no fault of your own, sometimes you may end up falling a little bit short.
All right. So if we pin you to some expectations this season, where are you expecting this team to go and do in the cup competitions in the league, and everything they're involved in?
I think they'll be in the title picture again in PL2 from what I've seen so far. It's a transitional season, so there's a few teams that will sort of stay where they are and don't have the same sort of depth that Chelsea have to bring through. Someone like Brighton will surely be a title challenger because of their level of investment and recruitment. They've just signed a highly touted player from Dortmund. They've brought in Jensen Weir from Wigan over the summer, and he's a quality player. And they've got a stronger under-23 team than most clubs and a loan program to rival Chelsea's. So they'll be up there. Tottenham look good, but this Chelsea team are conditioned to win at this stage, and they're obviously not going to go unbeaten because they've already lost already. They'll probably lose a couple more games, but I'd be surprised if they weren't up there for the title. The EFL trophy is a much sterner ask, just because the deeper you get into that competition, the more seriously the Football League clubs end up taking it, because they know that there's a Wembley match at the end of it. Whether or not that has fans in or not, who knows, because last season's final still hasn't been played. I think they're waiting to be able to get fans in for that one because Portsmouth and Salford are meant to be playing it. It's hard to predict, and it's even harder to predict the UEFA Youth League for this group this season because it's not going to take its usual format. They usually mirror the Champions League, but to prevent against unnecessary travel during this pandemic. They are doing a 64-team knockout tournament, straight knockout from next March onwards. So until we know where Chelsea are seeded in that, if it's going to be seeded, what format the competition takes, nobody really knows how it's going to go. But again, Chelsea have played some of their best football in knockout tournaments. I wouldn't write them off.
I mean, you'd be silly to write us off at this level. It is such a great long track record that we want to keep it going, obviously. And hey, Chelsea's expectations wait for no transition, for no change, and they will continue to not do so. But thank you, Phil, for the in-depth recap of the Dev Squad. I'm going to take us to a quick break. Huge thanks to these sponsors for financially supporting the show. When we get back, we're going to do the same thing, except run down the U18 squad. Be right back. All right, so quick transition to the U18s. The under 18s were in contention for a league and cup double and may still get their hands back on the FA Youth Cup should the FA stick to their plans to finish the competition this month. Again, pulling from another fantastic article from Phil. So this age group tends to see a significant amount of refreshing year to year, as we've kind of touched on a little bit right now. So from your perspective, Phil, how do you think we got on last season? How do you think the coaching staff did, the squad did? Again, recapping last season before we work into where we're at today.
Again, I think they did really well. It's hard because that was a title race that they weren't in the league when the season was curtailed. But they had everything in their hands to go and win it. They finished second on points per game behind Fulham, and they still had to play Fulham. A win there, and West Ham was still in the title picture as well, but West Ham still had to play Fulham. Chelsea still had to play West Ham. So there were 6 matches to go at that point. There was still an FA Youth Cup campaign to finish. They were in the semi-finals against Manchester United. And the Youth Cup may still be finished come the end of October. They're sort of talking about dates that they can try to work out. The last 3 matches of that: Blackburn versus Man City in one semi-final, Chelsea versus Manchester United in the other, and then a single leg final. Who knows whether that's going to happen, but it's hard to properly evaluate Ed Brand and James Simmons' work because they never got to see the campaign through. They were in contention for a domestic double. They were knocked out of the domestic under-18 League Cup up at Stoke with a really, really young team on a day that they could have picked a much stronger team, but they did that knowing that the cup competitions are usually there for some of the players who don't get as many regular minutes.
So looking at this squad, it obviously has many more names, and maybe what we should do instead of just running down the list is maybe kind of go in groupings. You know, just as saying maybe goalkeepers and defenders. We brought a lot of new players into the side. Who are some of the names that we should be paying attention to, either in incoming brand new into Chelsea? You know, we brought some players in from Finland and France, from kind of across Europe to bolster the side from areas maybe where we don't have kind of the best depth. So when you look at those two positional groups, who are you pointing the finger at or keeping an eye on for this season?
There's a real mixture from the guys that have come through the academy. The most familiar names to a lot of people will be Charlie Webster, Harvey Vale, and Jude Soonsup-Bell. Harvey played for the first team in the pre-season friendly against Brighton. He was still 16 at the time. He's turned 17 since. He's an attacking midfielder, left foot, scores plentifully. He scored 30-odd goals for the under-16s last year, many of them spectacular. He's already made some appearances for the development squad. Webster has captained England's under-16s. He's a playmaker, deeper midfielder, very, very easy on the eye. Dortmund have been interested in him, but he's committed his future to Chelsea. And Jude Soonsup-Bell is arguably the best centre-forward the academy have produced since Solanke and Abraham. And I know that's potentially high praise of some of the players who've come through in the time since, but he really, really looks the part as a modern number 9. And he's certainly one to keep an eye on. They've brought in some players from the Nordic regions. Brian Fiabema's already scored a youth team goal and scored a development squad goal. You've got Edwin Andersson from Finland, Jimmy Tauriainen from Finland. Sorry, Andersson from Sweden, Tauriainen from Finland. And they're both sort of players who prefer to play wide, cutting in. Taurianen's left-footed, Anderson's right-footed, and they've only played a few games so far, so the best of them is still to come. But through a mix of the recruitment from abroad this summer and the players that are coming through, those are the guys that would be worth watching, at least in the short term.
So there are obviously several first years in this bunch, just given some of the age gap. Besides, some of the newer signings that you just kind of talked about, is there anyone else that you would kind of pick out of this grouping, thinking about, maybe guys who have come up through the 16s or any of those other options that are, maybe on the defensive side?
On the defensive side, they've started the season with a more experienced defense. The guys who played a bit last season but haven't quite made that step. So Basher Humphreys, Charlie Wiggett, and Josh Brooking have started all the league matches so far. And it's quite useful to have a stable defense with such a young team ahead of them. And those guys will be looking to step up and make more of development squad opportunities in the second half of the season. But that's how it works sometimes. You have the Lewis Bates and Tino Livramentos and Miles Harrises who move on quickly and early. And then from the same age group, a couple of guys who they're more of the slower burner. Armando Broja did it last year when he exploded. That was his second year. And he went from under 18s to development squad to being a full international for Albania. So just because they haven't sort of lit it up and ended up on everybody's attention so far doesn't mean that they won't. And to that end, someone like Joe Haig, who plays an attacking midfield role, is definitely one to watch. He had his second half of last season ruined through injury. But before that, he was one of the more productive players in the team. Really, really nice player. There are some similarities to Mason Mount about him. He's maybe a little bit more of a natural mover and natural dribbler than Mason is, but I think he's a fantastic prospect and definitely one to worth watching when he's now fit and playing regularly again.
And we don't need to get into this discussion. I just want to make a point that these poor guys and the numbers that they wear because they might potentially play for Chelsea in a cup competition.
Oh yeah, it's the EFL insist on squad numbers being used for the EFL trophy because they are first team matches for the Football League teams. It's up to each Premier League club whether they classify them as first team matches in their records. Chelsea don't, so none of these guys are classed as getting their debuts in that competition. But it could be worse. We only go up to number 73 so far. Manchester City have gone up to 97, and I'm waiting for them to hit three figures. It's a little bit farcical, and I don't really know why the EFL enforce it.
So those fake player jerseys where it's like their Centurion level games could actually be a real jersey for a City player one day.
Yeah, that's the thing. These numbers have to be used for all first team matches. So if one of those guys from City ends up making his first team debut, then they'll be wearing something in the 90s.
That's the least soccer football-esque number. Again, I just have to point out some of our listeners will find that to be much more enjoyable than others. I apologize. I'm definitely on the fringes with some of this stuff. But to see a goalkeeper wearing number 72 is just uncomfortable for me. And then you even think about like Division I football here in America, right? You'll have like guys wearing the same number, one on offense and the other guys on defense, because they have so many players. They don't have enough numbers either. So what a weird situation we're in. But I do want to, pull this to the goalkeepers for a myriad of obvious reasons, Phil. I felt like we had a really strong group here already. And then we go and add another goalkeeper. So Christophe Lalachan very publicly putting these photos out, very excited. Sami Tiamkani just signed. I don't know. I don't know much about him yet. I need to get the article and understand. But we already had three different but strong goalkeepers. I'm assuming Chelsea didn't sign a bit of a random guy that he's going to be good as well. So how is this going to work for this group? This seems highly competitive.
Yeah, the only real thing I've learned about him so far is that I think his surname is pronounced Klimsani.
Oh, nailed it.
I still have to figure that out. But yeah, the club were looking for another academy goalkeeper. They had a Swedish boy on trial a few weeks ago as well. And I think it's because they have doubts about one of the current goalkeepers, Kelechi Chibueze, whether he's going to stay or not. Prince Adegoke is injured and will be out probably just before Christmas. And so with Ethan Wadey on loan at Dartford, you've got Carlos Ziga and Lucas Bergstrom. and Chibueze split between the three teams. So even if there are no problems with other goalkeepers, Clemsani comes in and immediately gives them another option to split between the two teams. They signed Teddy Sharman Lowe from Burton as well. He's an England under-17 goalkeeper, but they loaned him straight back to Burton, where he's made a couple of first-team appearances so far and will push for more throughout the season. But even if he doesn't play, it's not the worst place to continue to develop. He got an England call-up while at Burton. That doesn't happen very often. And also, as much as anything else, clubs are loading up on signings as much as they can because of the impending Brexit uncertainty on when and where you can sign players from outside of the UK. So Lolishon is the head of goalkeeping at the club. That doesn't necessarily mean he does any on-pitch work, but he oversees all of the goalkeeping departments. And naturally, being a Frenchman and having a very strong interest in French football, he has his ear to the ground on talent over there. Chelsea have played a couple of pre-season friendlies over in France, youth level, in each of the previous two summers to this one. In those matches, they'd have a few trialist goalkeepers that Lolishon had been interested in. Clemsani wasn't one of those, but he was a Clairefontaine call-up for the 2004 group. So one of the better players in French domestic football at Paris FC, and he was at Créteil before that. So he comes with decent credentials, and we'll probably see what he's got up his sleeve in the coming weeks. He made his debut in a friendly on Friday, kept a clean sheet, and that's a good start.
So as we take a look at how Chelsea have got on to start the season when it comes to the U18 side, Brighton, a thorn in the heel of all Chelsea Academy, apparently, with the start of the season being a 1-1 draw. We smashed West Ham 4-1. We went ahead and drew with Southampton 1-1, and then we did most recently lose 1-0 to Crystal Palace's U18 side, which right now puts Chelsea on 5 points, very firmly mid of the table. Aston Villa, Tottenham, and Norwich all in the kind of top three spaces. Just, again, same narrative that this is a massive restart after time off. It's also a very refreshed side full of new players. How do you see these results in maybe just the context of that? Are there any that you're looking at? Maybe like that loss to Crystal Palace seems a little odd, at least from a Premier League perspective, but is their academy that strong that is a result that we should have expected?
I wouldn't say it was expected, but this particular Palace group is highly rated, and 2 years ago it was 18 months ago, they're at the same age group against each other. Crystal Palace won the southern section of the Floodlit Cup, which is the most prestigious under-15 competition that's run in Premier League football. Chelsea were heavy favourites for that one. Crystal Palace went and beat Chelsea 3-0 and then went off and beat Wigan in the national final, so they were national champions of that age group. Wouldn't necessarily say that you'd have predicted them to come to Chelsea under 18 level and win, but it was a terrible game in horrible wet conditions. Palace got one chance, one goal. Chelsea really didn't create very much, and that happens. The Southampton match was probably more disappointing because Southampton hadn't started the season very well, and Chelsea, off the back of beating West Ham 4-1, would have gone into that thinking, right, we're going to set ourselves out here and we're going to try and go for the top of the table, because they would have gone top with a win. But they scored early, allowed themselves to get pegged back, and they'll view that as 2 points drop for sure. The Palace game is one of those that happens every season where it's just an upset result that you can't really do much about. The Southampton one would have been more frustrating. And okay, they've won one match out of four so far. It's a disappointing start. But if you look back at some of the record-breaking seasons under Edwards and Morris, they had shaky starts there as well. It's about finding your groove after the international breaks and into the second half of the season, and then piecing really strong runs of form together, because this is still a team that is taking shape. It's a mix of the under-16s that have come up and last year's second years, and a bunch of guys who could play at this level have already moved on. Once they find a bit of coherency and work out how to play together, then everything's coming back to the sort of results that we're expecting from them.
Yeah, we're looking at the table, and it's strange to see Chelsea not near the top so far. You have Villa on 12 points, Spurs on 10, Norwich, Palace, Arsenal, Fulham on 6, and then Chelsea with 5 in 7th place. Can you maybe talk about expectations for this particular group this season? We know how dynamite they've been moving, kind of throughout this league. But is it maybe an off season for this team, or is the expectation still that they're going to go and win the title in the South?
The expectation is always to win in the academy. They'll go in.
I knew that was coming. It was a trick question.
It's one of the 6 pillars of Chelsea as a club. They've got the here to win motto at every level, on the pitch and off the pitch. They want to win. And fine, 7 points off Aston Villa right now, but there's still 18 matches to go. They've still got to play Aston Villa twice. They've got to play everybody. They're back in action on this coming Saturday away to Reading. They'll certainly be wanting to win that, given that Reading have had a shaky start to the season themselves. And then they'll build from there. It's never anything other than trying to win. And there's always been criticisms of that sort of approach at Chelsea, with other managers and other supporters and other people saying, well, it's more about the development of the player than it is trying to win. And I'm pretty sure that they go hand in hand, because you're ultimately trying to win at a professional level. You're out there to win, and you're going to have to learn to do that sooner rather than later. So it's installed in Chelsea's players from a young age. They enter a lot of tournament football, both at home and before the pandemic abroad. And it's a mentality that's it's breeded all the way through, from the youngest age groups and from the top down, from Neil Bath all the way through. So I wouldn't expect anything other than to see Chelsea at the top end of this league when everything sort of settles down by Christmas.
Yeah, that's one of those you manage with, care and empathy, but expectations dictate you need to step it up. We're going to need a little bit more out of you.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was the beauty of the Youth Cup run, the 5 in a row, that every year someone would win it, and the new guys coming through next year would know, well, it's our turn now. We don't want to be the side team to let the side down and let the baton drop. And okay, they lost to Manchester United to end that run, but that was a Mason Greenwood hat-trick, and we know what Mason Greenwood's gone on to do in the very short time since. Sometimes you just come up against a much, much better player, and for most of that time, those players were at Chelsea. Inevitably, it's going to come to an end at some point, but they were back in the Youth Cup last season looking to win it, and they'll probably be doing so again this year.
All right. Well, there's a third facet to the academy.
The third pillar.
Yes. And that is the loan department. We can't really say loan arm anymore, I feel like. We're
getting towards that territory again.
I know. Obviously, they made it a little bit more difficult, but Chelsea, not to be deterred, with 29 loans at time of recording. What were we at our peak, like 64, 66, something like that?
It was
700.
It was the low 40s. I think in the peak season, we had about 50 moves with 44 players or something like that. So we're not quite there yet, but there are still a few players who haven't found a place to play for the new season. Like some Victor Moses, Danny Drinkwater, Dujon Sterling. So there is still the potential for some to come in the next week or so.
Well, it sounds like Moses is heading to Russia or Ukraine. Which one is it?
It's Russia.
I think he's
Moscow,
going to Russia. Yeah. Yep. Anyways, a lot of goalkeepers out, a lot of defenders out, a lot of midfielders out, and a handful of forwards out there. But I mean, when you go to the loan army, I mean, you've got everything from someone you've probably never heard of, right? Which, to be fair, a lot of people probably don't know Ethan Wadey. He's been on our radar for a little bit just because he's American, right? Goalkeeper on loan, all the way to Michy Batshuayi, right? Like, this is our loan army at Chelsea. Very widespread. And Ruben Loftus-Cheek is on this list again, and Timu Bakayoko is on this list. And then so is Marco Van Ginkel and Danilo Pantic. It is here to provide development opportunities. It is here to provide financial relief on some of these players and the prospects of financial gain with a Ross Barkley potentially, right? So anyways, Phil, from the loan army, I don't think we probably need to touch on some of the bigger players that we probably know more about. I'm more interested in even like, what about a Matt Miazga going to Belgium to play for Vincent Kompany? And what about Lewis Baker? Is he just kind of riding his time? And then you've got the young guys, Luke McCormick, Connor Gallagher, George McEachran. Some players, obviously Armando Broja. I'm really excited to see what he does at Vitesse, especially as you talked about his wild 18 months. So I guess floors to you just to kind of maybe nitpick some, and then we can chat about them as we see fit.
Brendan, where did you want him to start? You went through the entire.
Well, I said
yeah, I think we can talk. We can talk about the two young guys in the Premier League, Ampadu and Gallagher, because they've both made the step that people wanted them to take. Gallagher had an outstanding year in the Championship. Ampadu didn't have the season he wanted at Leipzig, but everybody knows what sort of player he can be. And a season of Premier League football for each of them, if they have the success that they desire, it positions them to come back into the Chelsea first team squad under Lampard, knowing that there is a pathway and an interest in integrating them. For Ampadu, he has the chance to prove, to say to the first team staff for Chelsea, you don't need to spend however many millions on Declan Rice. I'm your answer. Whether Ampadu's been playing centre half so far at Sheffield United, but we know that he can play in midfield. He does it to a very high standard for Wales. Whether Rice would be used predominantly as a midfielder at Chelsea or as a centre half, who knows? But Ampadu can just put himself into that argument. Gallagher can see that Loftus-Cheek's gone out on loan and Barkley's gone out on loan, and their futures at Chelsea are uncertain. And he might say, well, if I can outperform them playing at the same level this year for perhaps equivalent clubs, Fulham, West Brom, both came up at the same time. Loftus-Cheek's considerably older, obviously, but he has his own issues. The opportunity is there for these guys in the Premier League. When you play at the Championship level, you might think they're a move away. We know that in Abraham and Mount's case, that wasn't the case last season, but that was a very unique window for Chelsea. They didn't have the opportunity to go out and make transfers. Lampard had worked with Mount. Abraham had already played in the Premier League. So I think seeing players make the leap from Championship football to Chelsea is going to be rare. Getting these guys into the Premier League is what we want to see. And okay, so the season started in September. It's been a month and Gallagher hasn't actually played yet, one because he couldn't play against Chelsea. And then I think he was lacking fitness for West Brom's last game out. Ampadu's got an opportunity now because John Egan got suspended and Jack O'Connell will be out for the season. And well, let's see what they do.
So I think a couple other ones that might be interesting. You know, we obviously just signed Sarr and brought him in on a free and then sent him right out to Portugal. So that's kind of an interesting one to see him go directly into Porto. What are your thoughts on maybe some of the loans like that, where they are going to maybe some more of the top tier clubs, kind of in either, maybe not the big three when you're thinking about like La Liga, the Bundesliga, or the Premier League, but some of the loans that are happening, in other kind of countries kind of throughout Europe?
Sarr's an interesting one. Obviously, he was very highly rated when he first broke through at Nice, but it seems to have sort of hit a bit of a buffer in that progression, and it speaks volumes that he felt that his best bet this summer was to take a sign to loan deal and then joining a club where he's ostensibly playing out of position. Porto look to be using him at left back, and while he can do that, I think he projects best as a left-sided centre half. So if he felt that that was his best offer and that was the best loan on offer, then perhaps we need to sort of rein in our expectations as to what he can become. At the same time, it's a bit of a flyer for Chelsea. You've picked up a player on a free, on not particularly high wage. He's still pretty young. Let's give him the development time, and at worst, you might be able to sell him on for a small profit. I've always felt that Chelsea should use the Portuguese league more for loans. It's a little bit better than Belgium and the Netherlands in terms of league standard. It may be a half step below France, for example, but it would have suited somebody like Charlie Musonda down to the ground. For want of a better comparison, you've seen that Angel Gomez has just gone out there, having left Manchester United. Lille signed him, loaned him to Boavista, and he's very slight in stature, lacks the sort of dynamic element that Musonda has about his game, but they are sort of the similar size. And he's gone in there. Yes, he speaks fluent Portuguese, and his family are from Portugal, so maybe he has less adaptation to do. But he's gone in there and he looks a superstar talent already. Marcus Edwards, who used to be at Tottenham, went out and played. He joined Torre Guimarães, outstanding player. Already has teams looking at signing him back in the Premier League for high 8 figures. I don't know why Chelsea have sort of been reluctant to send players out there. Lucas Piazon is out there on the second half of a 2-year loan to Rio Ave. And that's the sort of standard that some of these players should look to as the bridge between their first loan and a really, really top end loan. It doesn't seem to be somewhere that they've looked to too often. They've instead looked at Belgium. Ike Ogbo has gone to Cercle Bruges this season. I think that might have something to do with Paul Clement being the manager. They've got a bit of a relationship there. I don't mind the top end of Belgian football because it's proven itself in Europe over the last few years, and it's sent some players onto a good level of football. Miazga out there as well now, but I'd certainly like to see them do more with Portugal over the years.
So I guess two more that are kind of interesting ones for me, Phil, and then we can kind of get this one in the books is Juan Castillo, who I thought was as good as gone last year, back to the Netherlands for a little bit, and Gurhi, who you kind of waxed poetic about a little bit earlier. I think both of these players are super interesting for different reasons. One, again, I think my expectation was that Castillo was not going to come back and Matson was going to kind of be the up and comer. And then Gurhi, obviously you've talked about in depth, but I think for those who have not heard you talk about Gurhi, maybe just elaborate a little bit on him and what his potential is, not only at Swansea, but then future at Chelsea.
Yeah, Gurhi's been brilliant for Swansea since getting back into the team during the restart. He had a shaky start there and was rightly taken out of the firing line by Steve Cooper. And then he came back in after the restart, and Swansea fans will tell you that he's basically been their best player. His ball progression is on another level for players of his age or even anyone else in the Championship. He's comfortable on the left side of the fence. They've been playing a 3. He's sort of assumed more responsibility this season. Mike van der Horn, the experienced defender, left. He's got Ben Cabango and Joe Rodon next to him now. He's sort of, they're very good in their own right. Rodon might be making a move to the Premier League in this coming week for big money. But Gurhi sort of projects as a Tomori type. He doesn't have the same explosive acceleration and make-up speed. But he ticks all the boxes in terms of defending. The playing on the left side, despite being right-footed, is a huge bonus. He's a leader. He's very, very confident. He basically has everything you want except for ideal height. He's 6'1", and again, like Tomori, that doesn't matter if you have the ability to leap and compete in the air. But it's why people might look at Mbuyamba and think, well, that's my defender for the future, not Gurhi, because he's 6'5". On Castillo's case, I think it would be a surprise at this point if Castillo had a future at Chelsea. He went to Ajax and had a year playing for their young Ajax team, and we thought, okay, they've got an option to buy. Why wouldn't he come back? Why would he come back, rather? Ajax chose not to take up that option. He's now gone to AZ Alkmaar, where he looks like he's going to be playing back up to Owen Wijndal. And if he was going to break through at Chelsea, he'd probably be ahead of Martson in the reckoning already. And the only way he's ahead of Martson in the reckoning is that he's older and has been out on loan. They both played together in the same team for a couple of development squad matches this year. As Martson, who got to play at left back, Castillo was up on the wing, which isn't his ideal position. I think the club are looking towards Martson as their guy now.
All right. I think we can wrap with the last one, which everyone is probably most interested about. I mean, that's Davides Apoco to Genoa. I mean,
that's right.
Groundbreaking. No, we want to wrap with Armando Broja, an absolute skyrocket on the graphs right now, just up and up and up. He's gone to a very familiar home for Chelsea Lone Army fans in Vitesse in the Netherlands. Thoughts on this move for him? Kind of what we're looking to see out of him before bringing him back, and just kind of how his career is going in general. So much positivity. We're hoping that he just continues to hit from one step to another step and continue his journey.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I wasn't initially sure that it was the right move to send him on loan, but I sort of had some Twitter discussions about it. And I've made a point over the years of saying the most important part of a player's development is to make sure you harness the momentum that they've got and don't let it go to waste. And certainly you've got the momentum of going from the under 18s to the development squad to Albania under 21s to an Albanian international in 12 months. Keep that acceleration going. Let's keep putting the tougher challenges in front of him, and let's see how he handles them. He's gone to Vitesse. He hasn't started a match yet, but he's already scored a goal for them. It was a poacher's goal, an instinctive goal you like to see from a striker. he scored a couple of goals for their reserves in just keeping fit because the international breaks have come along and you haven't really been able to get any rhythm or opportunities to start. He played half an hour against Ajax, doesn't look out of his depth there. So sending him to Vitesse for a year, even if he doesn't sort of light up the score sheet and score a bunch of goals, if he takes a lot from the experience in terms of learning what it takes to play at the senior level, then it's definitely the right move. He's going to run all day. He'll run those channels. He'll be a nuisance to defenders. He's strong. He's physical. And as we saw last season, he started to use that size with an intensity that just makes life hard for people. I temper expectations in terms of the goals you're going to see from him because I don't know how many games he's going to start for Vitesse. But we've learned over the years that someone like Mason Mount didn't start for the first 4 months over there and then exploded into life in the second half of the season.
Really?
Yeah,
that's crazy.
He couldn't get into the Vitesse team for the first 3 months, and sort of they were talking about whether they were going to recall him. And Eddie Newton had conversations with him, and he had conversations. And Mason was like, "No, I'm not coming back. I'm gonna go out here and I'm gonna make it work." I think the turning point. He came on.
I remember.
He came on against PSV Eindhoven and scored an outrageous outside of the foot goal in a losing cause, and he just kept getting more and more opportunities, and then they couldn't leave him out. And by the end of the season, he was scoring a hat trick for them in their Europa League playoff game. So, again, things can change very, very quickly in football, and Broja's proven that repeatedly over the last few years. Let's see what he does.
Well, it's also like a lesson too, I think, for because the loan pipeline's been there for so long. I think there's an expectation from Chelsea fans that just, if a player comes on loan from Chelsea to your club like Vitesse, that they're going to automatically get playing time because they're coming from Chelsea, right? And that's not always the case. I mean, we've seen plenty of loans that have not worked out, right, Phil? And that are just, maybe the manager doesn't rate the player coming in or whatever. So it always helps to set expectations on some of these loan deals.
Absolutely. And this is part of the loan experience. Eddie Newton would talk about it regularly while he was the loan manager at the club, is that you're going on loan and maybe for the first time in your career, you're not guaranteed anything. You might have been the superstar at Chelsea, but you're now going into an environment where you have to earn your place in the team. You have to prove day in and day out that you've got what it takes against established senior pros. And we're not going to call you back if it isn't working out necessarily, because this is part of the learning curve we want. Something that Eddie was always big on was that players have to go and learn what he called the dark arts. You have to learn to be a little bit nasty sometimes on the football pitch and to fight and to battle, because fine, we know that you've got the technical skills, we know that you're physically gifted, but have you got the mentality to come back and play for Chelsea? And so this is all part of it. Ampadu is a decent example of that from Leipzig last year. He didn't play anywhere near as much as he wanted, but by staying out there for the whole year and working under a manager like Julian Nagelsmann, he's at the very least broadened his education and learned a new culture and a new system of playing and new responsibilities. And those are all things that he can bring back to Chelsea, onto now Sheffield United with him, and use to further his own course to try to break into the team at Chelsea.
I am thoroughly excited just for another season with this group. I think it was good to set the foundation for everyone, Phil. So we appreciate you kind of running us through last season into this season and kind of where we're at. And having these more regular discussions is going to be a great way for, our Chelsea community and hopefully the broader one to stay engaged with this group, especially as we've seen its role overnight, become increasingly important under Frank Lampard with Jody and Joe, as you mentioned. Like, this is an important part of the club that we need to stay engaged with and watch the development. So we're looking forward to it. I know we've talked a lot, Nick and Dan, about the importance of this team, and obviously we want to add the women in as well. But Phil, you're a huge part of it, and we're grateful that you're willing to come on and share your knowledge with it. Like I said, it's been a little difficult for us to watch the games right now, so thank you for investing your own personal time into it, and then coming out and sharing it with us as well. So thank you, sir.
As always, thank you guys for having me. As you're probably well aware by now, I could talk for as long as the day runs about the academy, and to have the opportunity to be on a platform like you guys and to share it with such a such an established audience is a privilege.
Tens of people, Phil. Tens of people are
we're looking
to this.
forward to the time that we bring both you and Joe on at the same time, and
God.
we'll walk away from the Zoom call for a little bit.
In today's
and then we'll
6-hour edition of the London Is Blue podcast.
I can see it right now. Build this pay-per-view event, 3-hour extravaganza.
HBO limited series.
Oh, awesome. Well, anyways, listeners, go follow Phil. Tell him thank you for jumping on and sharing all this knowledge. Without him and you, there's really not much that goes into this because Nick, Dan, and I were complete passengers, and understandably so.
Just the way I like it, baby. Just the way I like it.
Nick and Dan, thank you, gentlemen, for joining. Listeners, you're the best part about this, as always. So jump on, let's talk about these players in the social medias and the Discord server as well. But that's going to wrap us up. Again, we're one day closer to Chelsea returning against Southampton, so we'll continue to drop the content. Daily uploads on YouTube if you need a little fix from us, but that's going to wrap us up. So until next time, Chelsea.